Hey guys, Bill Blanchard here, and today I want to share with you another PixelMath script that I wrote, which is probably the best one that I've done to date. This is a process that I come up with called Narrowband Normalization. Now, as you know, astrophotography processing is quite difficult, so I wanted to come up with a way that speeds up the processing while giving you the colors that you want out of an astrophotography image. So you have seen images like from the Hubble Space Telescope of like the pillars of creation, and it's an image that showcases a lot of the gases that are in that nebula, and they put a lot of color and time into creating that image. So I wanted to come up with a PixelMath script that allows you to get those same type of colors from a simple drag and drop method. So for example, I got a starless image here, the Pelican Nebula, and I'm just going to drag my icon over and boom. So as you can see, it pulled out all of the oxygen, and you can see a lot of the hydrogen here in this part of the nebula. And this process can be modified, and I'll get into that later in the video, but this is a really cool method to help get what you want out of an astrophotography image. So let me explain why I came up with this method and also how I came up with this method. So to start, let's talk about some of the methods that are out there. We have the SHO method, also called the Hubble palette, in which we use a mono camera and specialized filters that only detect 3 gases in outer space: hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen 3. This image here is from the Space Telescope, which they use these 3 filters to create this image here. Here's a chart that shows the wavelengths in which the filters allow the light to pass through. And here we do a channel combination, which we assign the sulfur 2 to the red channel, the HA to the green channel, and the O3 to the blue. Now, when you first combine an image like this, you're not going to get this type of image here. So typically what you want to do is you want to do curve adjustments that allows you to equalize the sulfur 2 and oxygen 3 brightness to match that of the brightness of the HA. So after curve adjustments, you do a channel combination that allows you to combine the 3 gases into the RGB channels, and you should get an image. Well, you think that you're going to get an image that looks like this, but most likely you're going to get an image that looks like this. I mean, that's just the reality, but that's why I made this math, to help you get to an image like this. Alright, so instead of doing any of these curve adjustments, I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to undo that curve adjustment, undo that curve adjustment. And one thing that I like to do is I always do this on non-linear data, but one of the things I do, and I'm going to actually go through a complete workflow towards the end of this video, but I do like to remove the stars now and just do this on a starless. That way I can preserve the star color. Because if you remember from that last image, the star colors look kind of messed up. That's what happens when you start doing curve adjustments. So let me just remove the stars real fast. All right, so I removed all the stars. So all I'm going to do is put these together. You can see that this is my image. Now I'm going to normalize it. So what normalizing does is it's actually automatically increasing the brightness to that of this image. So instead of doing any curve adjustments, you can see that we did it automatically. So you don't have to adjust these levels anymore. So anyways, this is a quick tool. Now you're still going to want to do like a final curve adjustment here, just to bring out the contrast if you're trying to match this. But for color wise, I mean, they're almost identical. And it's just from a drag and drop operation. So let's talk about normalization just on its own and why it's important. So normalization is like the most important part of astrophotography image processing. Now, you may have heard the term when you're doing image integration, when you're stacking all your frames. Light frame normalization, if you have a stacking software that doesn't have normalization, then don't use it, because you're going to be losing a lot of information. So what normalization is if you have an image of different brightness, for example, say you're imaging over multiple nights and the moon, each night that you image, the moon gets brighter, you really want to normalize your images so the image brightness matches for each one. So here's some clips that I took from Pixnsight's website, and you can see that here's some recommendations for normalization. And obviously for darks and bias, you don't really want to normalize them, because what we're trying to do is you're trying to stack and average out the noise or keep your dead pixels. There shouldn't be any type of normalization done there. Flats, you do, and they typically use a multiplicative normalization. And for lights, it's always the scale and offset, which is basically the additive and scaling, and I'll explain that here in a minute. So this is the formula that I'm using to normalize the O3 and the S2 to match the brightness of the HA. So basically what I'm doing, and I don't want to get too heavy into these formulas, but here you're actually subtracting, you're trying to get to a 0 point. So typically when, and you might remember this from like high school math days, where you might be doing slope and intercept type interpolation, or min-max, trying to match a data set and scaling it to the min-max. Well, basically that's all you're doing here. So for the scaling and offset formula, what you're doing is you're actually subtracting your image, the median from your image, and then adding the median from that of the HA. So if this is your background signal, you're removing the background signal from your O3 and your S2, and then you're adding that background offset to that of the S2 and O3 from your HA. So this is essentially just making sure that your black points match. So that's the offset. Now the scaling is this K value here, and this K value is determined by, there's a couple ways that you can do it, but in this case for normalization, what you're doing is you're taking the average deviation of all these pixels and you're dividing it by the average deviation of these pixels. So if you have a greater deviation, in which you will on your HA, and then your O3 is down here, what we're doing is we're scaling it up. So to summarize, once you change your offsets to match, now you got to change your scaling. So essentially what you're doing is you're increasing the brightness while maintaining the same black level. So to kind of show you, because I'm just a visual person, say you have like a reference frame when you're looking at it in terms of like your immigration normalization, but it doesn't matter, because in this particular case, I can actually say that this is the HA frame, right? And let's just say that this is O3, right? So what we're doing with this formula is we're actually dropping to the same black point, and then we're scaling up the brightness. So instead of doing curve adjustments like I showed you earlier, we're actually just doing it with math. The thing is the math that we're using is the same math that we're using for image integration. So it's just the right way of doing it, but it's just a fast and easy way to get you to where you need to be to show off in an equal brightness your HA, O3, and S2. So here's another example of a show image that I put together just using some SHO data that I had. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the stars. Now you can see that this image, because of how we added it, with H always being green, there's a lot of HA in the elephant trunk nebula. But when you see images online, you see a lot of blue pop out. Well, this is because, again, of these curve stretches that you do. So let's take a look at the image if we separate it back out. Now you can see a lot of hydrogen. Here's the oxygen, very little, and here's the sulfur, right? So again, instead of doing these curve adjustments, we're just going to normalize it. So I'm just going to drag over the normalization. Boom. Okay. So what this did is it equalized all three channels. So if I separate it, you can see, the HA looks identical. You can see the sulfur is now really bright. And of course the oxygen is really bright too. Now, depending on your data and your noise levels, one of the things that you might have to worry about when doing any type of normalization is that the areas of signal pop up really good, but you're also popping out a little bit of the noise. So what I've done is I've created some tools within the code. So let's open up the code. I'm going to hit undo. Okay. So when you open up this code, it's kind of gives you the main rundown. Drag this arrow over to your image. And again, I like to do this on non-linear data. If you want to experiment on linear, I don't think you're going to see the big results like you're seeing here. But I do prefer non-linear, and I do suggest that you remove the stars. And in one of my previous videos, I did a PixelMath segment on RGB to narrowband. You're going to want to follow that same procedure to add your stars back so that you can preserve that color, because the minute that you start changing the colors here, you're going to change the colors of the stars if you add them back. So you can refer back to that video, or towards the end of this video, I'll do a complete workflow and show you how you can add that back in. But this is some text that you guys can read. Now, one thing that you're going to note here, it says on the symbols page, so this is where we're going to be doing all of our changes. So on the symbols page, it says turn off the S curve to 0 or turn it on with value 1. So let's go ahead and go to the symbols page. Here I've got an S2 boost, here I've got an O3 boost, I've got an overall brightness control and an S curve. Now, the S2 and the O3 boost, when you go look at the code, the boost is right here. All I'm doing is the standard deviation difference that I was talking about that actually does the scaling. If we wanted to bring that down, just say the intensity is just too much, we can. However, I actually don't suggest doing that, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Because we have a brightness control. So whenever something saturates on your screen, you'll see values of 1. Well, that actually exists, on the outputted image, but in PixelMath, you do have values higher than 1. So if we do know that we're going to get some stuff saturating out after we run the math by clicking on this and actually seeing if we got 1 values, what we'll do is we'll undo it. We'll taper down the overall brightness of the image. That way we can recover anything that would blow out. And again, I'll show you some examples later on. But if you remember, so the original image that I did looked like this, but you saw when I had separated the O3 that we have some of that low background noise kind of coming out. And when you have images that are just really low in O3, this is a potential issue that you can have. So what I've done is I've created an S curve that will apply an S curve to the O2 and to the O3, because what we're trying to do is tame down some of that low level noise while bringing out the signal that is high. So all I got to do is change this to a 1, bring this over, and you can see that now we don't have any noise, but now we've brought out the blue. So and again, even if the blue is coming out a little bit too strong, you can actually change the boost level, say to a point, let's change it to like a 0.85, which is a 15% reduction. And you can see that the blue is tamed down a little bit more. Now you do have green, and I'm going to show you how to fix that here in a minute, but for the fundamentals of how this normalization works, this is kind of how you would handle it for SHO. And again, if I wanted to just keep my boost level, but just decrease the brightness just to protect from saturation while still using the S curve, you can see that the overall brightness of the image has come down, but we're still showing off that oxygen, okay? But as you can see, we still have green. Now, this is just going to be a fundamental problem with SHO. So once we normalize the data, Now we can do things like SCNR to fix the data when it comes to areas that contain more green than your red and blue. So in the description below is another download link, and it's called Modified SCNR. Now, my good friend James Lamb actually came out with a really good procedure on how to do SCNR by PixelMath. And so what I've done is I actually did modify the original code that he had. So I created this code here, and I'm crediting the concept to James Lamb because he did a really good job at producing this. But what's different with his version of SCNR is the fact that it actually preserves the luminosity of the image. And the only thing that I added, I did change up some of the code. I simplified it some. And I also added this part right here, which is the amount. So if you think that the SCNR is too strong, you can dial down the amount. The amount is from 0 to 1 being 100%. So I typically run just a 95%. So you just drag this over, and what it's going to do, it's going to remove the green from the image so that we have a nice show type image that's not too horrible with a green color cast. And you might see some stuff happening here on the edges. This isn't the best data that I have, but for this example, you can see that this is just an automated process of making this work. Now, this also all depends on how you initially stretch this data. Again, for this example, I put in a pretty good stretch just so you can see the color differences for YouTube. But this is basically how you would do it. So again, thanks for James Lamb for providing this PixelMath. And if you wanted to download this, you can either download his original version from his YouTube channel or just download this one, which is, again, it's the same formula, just rewritten, and it works great. So let me undo this. And but yeah, that's where you went. You went from this to an automatic process here. And again, you can dial this, do your contrast curve adjustments after. But it's just a simple way of taking an image that is so heavy in green and bringing out the S2 and the O3. So now I want to jump over to the HOO processing, and this is going to be good for you one-shot color guys. And because of this, I'm also going to talk about my buddy Luke, because he's one of the best one-shot color image processing guys that I know. And what I've done is took a concept that he actually does and put it into this normalization process, which is the HOO normalization. Now the HOO method is very similar to the show method, but you're only using hydrogen data and oxygen data. So there's some targets out there that don't have a lot of sulfur. So that's typically why you would want to do a combination like this. Or if you're using a one-shot color camera, your dual narrowband filters only allow in just your O3 and your HA. So on a one-shot color camera, this is going to be automatic, whereas when you're just doing mono combination, you're going to want to combine the channels manually. So here's an image right here of the Cygnus wall shot with a one-shot color camera. But how do you get that Hubble type look out of an image like this? So for example, if you look at this image right here, this is an image that Luke with Lucamatico did, and as you can see in his image, he brought out a lot of the O3 signal, and then you can see the HA signal here in the wall. But how do you get that to show up on this image? So processing one-shot color data could be quite challenging because we're also dealing with the Bayer matrix. So this is a RGB matrix, which is your typical matrix for a one-shot color astro camera, in which you have 1 pixel for red, 1 pixel for blue, but you have 2 for green. So a lot of times you'll get a heavier green color cast. You'll have to do things like SCNR to help bring some of that out. But one thing that you'll notice is that the green, because you do have 2 pixels, you'll also have a better signal to noise ratio to that of the blue. So where are we going with this? Well, let's talk about the next part. So before I go on showing you more of these methods in operation, I'd first like to give credit to a good friend of mine, Luke Newbold, from the astrophotography YouTube channel called Luke Amatico. Most of the images this guy produces is straight out phenomenal, so please check out his channel. Now, Luke mainly uses one-shot color cameras and has a few videos and tutorials out there in which he shows you how to take one-shot color camera data and turn it into something that looks very close to the Hubble palette. So how does he do this? Luke uses a technique in which he separates the RGB channels and reassigns them versus just using the data straight from the camera. He assigns the HA to the red channel, which is the original channel for HA, but instead of doing the same thing for the blue channel using O3, he deletes the blue channel and assigns the original green channel to the blue. So you might be thinking, why? Well, if you look at the chart that shows you the color spectrums per the gas wavelengths, you'll see that the O3 gas is located right in the middle of the blue and the green camera filter spectrums, slightly favoring the green. However, most one-shot color cameras has the RGGB matrix. The signal-to-noise ratio for the green channel is much better than that of the blue. For that reason, he discards the blue for the green. Also, similar to show processing, in which you would equalize the data before recombining via curve stretches, Luke does the same thing using histogram and curve adjustments to adjust the O3 channel to match that of the brightness of the HA. With the HA assigned to the red and the O3 assigned to the blue, we now need a new green channel. So in Luke's method, he uses PixelMath to blend 60% of the HA data to 40% of that of the O3 data to combine and create a synthetic green channel. Next, he uses channel combination to create a new HOO image. By equalizing the O3 to the brightness of the HA, this makes the blue colors more prominent. Then I started thinking, why don't I use the process that I use for SHO normalization and do it for HOO, but using the concept that Luke has, where he actually doesn't use the original blue channel, he gets rid of it. We're just going to use green for blue and then create a synthetic green using the red and the blue, which is the HA and the O3. And that's exactly what I've done here. So if we look at the math, R channel, this is just the R channel right here. We're going to keep the original, because this is a one-shot color, we're going to keep HA in its place. Now blue, as you can see, I'm actually doing the normalization formulas here, but you can see that I'm actually using the original green channel, which is the 1. And the 0 is actually referencing back over to the red, because red is what we're trying to normalize the brightness to. So here's the scaling factor. Right here is the math, which we're controlling the scale and the offset. And then I've got a S-curve formula here. And here's a simple logic to where, back over on the symbols, if we don't want an S-curve, we keep it at 0. If we do, we'll keep it at 1. And then the end result, we're going to multiply it by a brightness value, and the brightness value is always going to be 1, which is 100%. The green, however, has the same values as what we have blue, but we're now doing the blend. Now, per Luke's method, he's actually using an HA blend of 60% HA and 20% O3. And that's exactly what we're doing here. If you wanted to change this to 50%, type in a 0.5, or if you want to go 70, you can change it however you want, but that's how it works. So just using the default values, again, on a nonlinear starless image, I'm going to bring this over. And now you can see that all that HA just pops out, and we have the nice signals here in the hydrogen alpha range, but that just, that looks good on its own. So again, you can always look through the data, make sure that you don't have any saturation points, because the cool thing is if you're not saturated, now you can do other things. Like if I wanted to bring in, let's bring in a little bit more saturation. Let's make those colors pop. And now we can do our contrast adjustment by bringing this out, bringing this a little darker, accept that. And now, I mean, those gases really just pop compared to your typical one-shot color image. Now you've got this. So the next stage is, how do you take these stars and bring them on to here? Because if I just unscreen these stars and bring them on here, the color difference is so much stronger, it's not going to look good. So let's back it up, and I'm going to show you how we're going to add the stars. So I'm just going to delete this, and what we're going to do in the download description is going to be another link for my RGB to narrowband stars. Now, even though this is still a narrowband image, the transfer process is still the same. So let me just open this up, and it's right here. Okay, so we're going to clone for RGB stars, and then we're going to do a star removal. Okay, so next I'm going to actually just clone my starless with the tool here called clone for NB. So I got a starless for RGB and a starless for NB. So the NB is the one that we're going to normalize. And if I wanted to again do a curve adjustment here, let me just reset this, add a little bit more saturation, slight S curve here for contrast, close this down. So now that we have the original starless and our new, all we got to do, and because of the file structures are named the same, which is according to the math here, right here, all I got to do is drag this over to my image with the stars, and boom, there's my stars transferred over to my narrowband image. And that looks pretty good. And that was just literally just maybe a minute of processing. So you can see how these tools can just kind of help you out. All right, so let's have some fun here. Let's bring in a raw target. Let's do the Pac-Man Nebula, okay? So as you can see, this is completely linear. And what we're gonna do is, again, in the download description, let's bring in our stretching maths, and let's bring in our normalization. Let's bring in the RGB to narrowband transfer, and also maybe the star reduction mask. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do an unlinked stretch. And there we have a stretched image, okay? So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clone for RGB. And I'm not going to clone for the narrowband yet, just because we'll do that here. So the next thing I'm going to do, because we're already linear, I'm going to go ahead and do some noise reduction. And I'm going to remove the stars. Now, one thing I want to show you real fast is I'm just going to go ahead and separate these because it's not normalized. You can see that there's noise in the blue, and again, this is why we picked the green over the blue. So if we're actually using the green, you can see that the brightness in the green, which is the 03, is pretty good. It's pretty close to that of the red. I mean, that is just the Pac-Man Nebula. It has a lot of oxygen and a lot of hydrogen. So the normalization process is going to give it a little bit more boost, and that's what I'm going to show you. The one thing that I want to do right now is, let me go ahead and clone this, because this is the one that we're going to start normalizing. And let me just pull up some curves. Let me just reset this. And I'm going to go ahead and tone down, because of the way it stretched, just with the automatic stretching math that I did. What I want to do is I do want to tone down the brightness a little bit. So all I'm going to do is just kind of bring down the brightness here. Okay. because this is such a bright target in the center. Like if I look at and this is the original, my red value is already at say 0.7. It's almost it's just over between 70-75%. And right now it's a little bit darker. It's around 70 versus 75, but I just wanted to tone down this part. So going back to the HOO normalization, which you can't really see any O3 right now. Now you can see the O3, okay? So now I'm going to undo this and I'm going to show you something. So what if we want to show off more of the O3? Let's add 20%, which is 1.2. So now the O3 is really popping, but now you can see I got ones, okay? So your initial assessment would be like, okay, well, let's just drop this down, but we actually don't want to do that because there's still information there. So let me undo that. Now I'm going to drop the brightness control to 0.19. Yeah, let's just try 19, which is 90% versus 100%. So now you can see, now we're not saturated in blue, and a lot of that blue is coming out. So it looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to close this down. So the next part, just like in the last segment, is how do we get these stars here? Well, our file structure is already named. So I'm just going to drag this over to the image with stars. And now here's our image with stars. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this Pac-Man, say final. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do star reduction. And you probably saw this math on Luke's channel or even Sean from Visible Dark, but in the download description is also my star reduction math, which I've already loaded here. So this is my star list. I'm just going to copy this name, come back over here. I'm going to use method 3 and I'm going to enter the star list name. I'm just going to type it in here, and now I can just drag this over, and as you can see the stars have reduced. Let me just do it one more time. So now the stars are a lot less in brightness, and if I really wanted to make another change is, let's see, let's just add more saturation to it. And there you go. Now, if you want to make more changes, that's entirely up to you. There's the mask, PixelMath for the masks that you can use as well. But again, this is just a simple way of taking whether or not you have a show image or HOO or a one-shot color, and how you can turn it into something like this. And it just takes a matter of minutes. And just real fast, here's the center of the Heart Nebula. And running the same process, here it is now. Here is NGC 7822, and here it is now. The Wizard Nebula. Cygnus. So I really hope that these tools are of use for you guys. This really helps for processing SHO, HOO, or your one-shot color narrowband data. But yeah, please give these a try. Let me know what you think. I hope they help. And yeah, that's all I've got. So thanks for watching.